Open Minds Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs, they're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. Are you guys going to want to come build this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sighting of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said, "There's a monster on the wall."
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, bizarrites, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the motherfucking internet. I am the one that, like one awesome listener called Shane Squatch.
And I am the big bad Boo Daddy, number 69 of the Florida Man games. That's a throwback to last week's episode, Orin Felix.
Which is perfect because it leads us into our next point. Actually, I wanted to give a big shout out to actually somebody real quick. One of the people that always follows the show, comments on everything, basically leaves these awesome comments saying things like, "You guys keep my life going. Y'all are so dope." Big shout out to Bloodchugger because he is the one that calls me Shane Squatch and also the one that calls you Boo Daddy. So now you have a face of the
yes,
man. Yes,
he is a super cool guy. We go back and forth on Instagram a little bit. Very cool guy. Thank you for your support, Bloodchugger.
Oh, I didn't know you guys talk too. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Hell yeah, dude. So now it's not just a one-ended thing. Awesome. Big shout out to Bloodchugger. And getting into our next point, actually, because actually he may have even shown up to the last one. Our next live episode of Bizarre Inquiries will be on the Open Minds Media YouTube on April 3rd, and that will be at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and of course we will give you guys some more information as we get a bit closer to it. And for everybody that showed up to the last one, we greatly appreciate you, and hopefully you guys will also show up to the next shit show. But if anybody wants to put their mark on the shit show, Orin, tell them exactly how they can do that.
You guys can submit a question, you can submit an article, you can submit a YouTube video, anything like that. And, you know, we always try to throw something kind of fun and wacky in there. It can be something not even paranormal related. If you just want us to talk about something weird, off the wall, funny, doesn't matter. Just anything you want us to inquire about, shoot that our way and we will inquire about it. So if you guys want to do that, or if you want to get in contact with us for any other way whatsoever, Shane, tell them how they can do that.
You guys can, number one, email us through our email, which is bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that we're the most active on, or you guys can also get a hold of us through the submission forum, which of course is available on our link tree, which is down in that show description. And the last way that you guys can get a hold of us is that you guys can call or text us on our hotline, whatever's easier for you guys, and that number is 313-364-1551. And you guys can even utilize that phone number if you guys want to give some shout outs or anything like that in the beginning of the show. It all gets brought into my phone from Google Voice through MP3s. So if you guys, want to give us some awesome shout outs on the show, shout out some other people, birthday wishes, any of that, you guys can also call into that number. And as long as, you guys aren't talking too much shit, which, some of the shit talking's fun, so I might still put it on the show. Then I will.
I was going to say, that might be fun too.
Yeah, I don't know how much berating I could take, but I'll definitely put it on the show if somebody wants to call into the lines and just call us a bunch of mean names, but it's what it is.
You got brittle ass spirit.
And if anybody by chance thinks that we might deserve a rating, which we hopefully do if you guys are sitting and enjoying listening to the show every single week, you guys can leave us a review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify. Whatever is easy for you guys, we greatly, greatly appreciate it. Your guys' continued support is what makes the show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help the show grow and improve. So we really, really thank you guys.
And as always, all of the shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
Please welcome to the show a really fun guy to talk to, collector of a lot of fascinating stories, and of course, to top it all off, an author, because of course he has to put all of those into one place. Please welcome to the show, Nomar Slevik. How's it going today, man?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Nomar, thank you so much for coming on. It's nice to finally meet you. Like we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, we've got a mutual friend in Kevin from Where the Weird Ones Are. So I've heard a lot about you, and it's nice to finally meet you kind of sort of in person. So thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Absolutely. Nice to virtually meet you as well. And much love to Kevin. Shout out to Kevin and Where the Weird Ones Are. He's got a lot of good stuff going on over there.
Have you guys gotten a chance to meet up just out of curiosity because you guys are both in Maine? Because I know he's always meeting up with people.
Yeah. We've met up a couple times, not to record, but he came to a couple events that I was doing. And so we got to like meet in person a couple times, which is cool. Hey,
man, maybe one day I'll make it up to Maine because I've been wanting to go up there anyways. Kevin's been trying to get Orin and I both to go up to Maine for something.
It's a good time. I would recommend the summer, but yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I ever go up there, it's going to have to be in like June or July.
That's like your winter down there in Carolina.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it was like 74 degrees here today, so that's not too bad for March.
Wow. I rode my bike today, and it was 37 degrees, and it was windy, and that's actually one of our warmer days. And I was dying at the end of it, just freezing.
Hey,
if it drops much below 60, I'm just like done.
We're hitting the 40s in Michigan, so we're like the midway point here, apparently.
Yeah, that's right, man. Like Shayn and I have some similar weather.
But
it's not for me.
Yeah, I can't do the heat, man. I'm not good in heat. I like the cold. So I guess a good spot to start everything off, man, for anybody that may not be familiar with your books, your work, some of the stuff that you collect and investigate, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you do, man?
Yeah, sure. I'm an author, a researcher, a sometimes investigator, and into all things paranormal. I do have a very specific and big interest in extraterrestrial stories, but as long as it's strange, I'm going to be into it. And that's, crazy true crime or whatever, but that's kind of my thing. Anything that's weird, I want to know a lot about it. So I'll research and find out what I can about a story. And sometimes I, in my opinion, find some new information. I think I'm one of the few people who found a UFO connection to the Dover Demon case.
Oh, wow.
That's not a thing that's really been made aware too often. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool. And I talked about that in one of my books. But yeah, UFOs have been fascinating me since I was like 5 years old. I had a sighting when I was really young, and I to tell it quick, I had woken up in the middle of the night. I wasn't sure what woke me up. There was some sort of loud noise. So I'm kind of looking around for an explanation, and I start hearing these light taps at my bedroom window. So I look, and then I see the sky light up. And I was like, oh, it's a thunder and lightning storm. This is cool. So I kneel up, to watch it. And I'm seeing the sky light up. I'm seeing these little cracks of lightning, and I'm hearing booms from thunder. And after just a little bit, there was this really disturbing lightning bolt. Like if I were to ask you to draw one, you would draw this jagged yellow line, and it was stuck in the sky, like in a cloud. And there's like a halo around it, and there's electricity coming off of it. And I'm not really sure what happened after that, other than falling back asleep. I woke up the next morning, and it was still there. And I went to show my father, and by the time I got him upstairs into my room to show him out the window, it was gone. And he proceeded to tell me that there was no rain or anything the night before. So he didn't know what I was talking about. And, I was 5 years old, so the next shiny thing caught my attention. I forgot about it. And a couple of weeks later, I'm woken up in the middle of the night again. But it's my dad, and he's bringing me downstairs. And he takes me and my sister and my mom, and we all go outside. And he's telling me to look up, but it's freezing. And I have like my head buried in his chest. And he's like, look up, buddy, you got to look up. And when I do, I see this like kaleidoscope of colors, and it was the Northern Lights. It's the only time I've seen them. So I think those two things happening at such a young age created like a core memory for me that strange stuff happens in the sky and I should probably pay attention. And I kind of have been ever since, and I think that lightning bolt thing was like the first time I saw a UFO. I don't know if it was some kind of screen memory or because I was young, that's just what it looked like to me, and I didn't have any other frame of reference, but I think that was the catalyst to my fascination for all things weird.
Say the first reaction to go to sleep, that's already like you see something weird and then you don't remember anything till the morning. That's already like a red flag in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've thought about that over the years, what did something just gently put me back to sleep so I wasn't watching what was going on, or was something more sinister and I was taken, or, I've never felt like an abductee at all. I'm certainly an experiencer because I've seen a bunch of stuff, but yeah, I can't say I was abducted, but it is strange. Like you said, Shayn, like, I'm watching something crazy fascinating and I just go to sleep.
Seems like that happens a lot with these kind of stories, though. Yeah. Like you just have a strange, not as intense reaction as it seems like, you should in a situation like that. Nomar, if you don't mind, would you talk a little bit more about this Dover Demon UFO connection that you discovered? We actually covered the Dover Demon not so long ago on the show, so I'm super interested to hear some of your research and what you found out out of it.
I'm glad you brought that one back up because I was waiting to spin that one back around.
Oh, you knew I was going to bring it up.
I saw you taking notes.
Yeah. I actually saw that too. So there was this family that was driving around the town of Natick on that same night as as Bartlett's sighting of the Dover Demon and the other kid. I forget his name now. I remember Abigail or Abby. I can't remember that second kid. Anyway.
Yeah, Bartlett's the only name that sticks out in my head.
Yeah. Fair enough. So the same night that Bartlett saw his Dover Demon, there was a family driving around Natick, and they claimed to have seen a UFO in the skies of Natick, and they started following it. So the UFO was actually moving. It was fairly low. I forget how low now, but it was fairly low, like just above the treetops, and they were following it, and they like went out of Natick and into the next town over, which is a sub level of Natick, like South Natick or something like that. I forget the name of it now. And it goes into another town, and they're right next to the town of Dover. And they see this UFO, they're following this UFO, and then the UFO takes off at a high rate of speed. They also claimed, one of the passengers also claimed that they saw this weird little animal thing near the car as they were like following the UFO. So was that another Dover Demon? And they didn't even think much of it that night. They thought the UFO was cool, but they weren't certain if it was a UFO, and everybody really dismissed this alien animal thing that one of them claimed to see, but they were talking about it the next night. They hadn't heard anything about the Dover Demon case. I mean, it was unfolding, during that time. And they started talking about that little animal weird thing they saw, and it wasn't an animal, guys. I'm pretty sure it was like a little humanoid thing, and they're like, oh, maybe it was an alien from that UFO. Like that would be crazy. And then it kind of died off, and that story had no legs for a lot of years. I think it might have been 2014 when a gentleman named Christopher Forrest found the story and published a part of it, but he didn't even really tie it to the Dover Demon case. It just was a coincidence that it happened on the same night, but we're talking like one or two towns over the same night, and a UFO was seen and the Dover Demon was seen, right in the same area. So for me, it was very validating because the Dover Demon has always seemed like a gray alien to me. But I was talking to somebody else fairly recently. The Dover Demon also seems like one of the first maybe pale crawler stories, which could be interesting. I think the only difference there is the height. Pale crawlers are typically described as tall, and this thing, the Dover Demon, was quite short. So, I'm not sure what to make of that. And pale crawlers could be aliens anyway. So it could all be the same thing. Who the hell knows? But that's basically what I know about it.
No, that's awesome. When I was doing research when we talked about the Dover Demon, I didn't come across that story in anything. So I think it's kind of funny, these old accounts that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, similar to like you were saying, people don't put these pieces together till after the fact. We talked about the Flatwoods Monster not so long ago as well. And, there's this whole other sighting that happened the next day of this, kind of like reptile creature. And there's speculation that it was the Flatwoods Monster without its suit of armor on or whatever. And like people didn't put that together until years later. So I think it's really cool that, these people, like you said, if it happened 2 towns over back in the 50s or whatever, I mean, you'd have no idea that this happened. And now because of the internet and, weird shows like this, people are starting to put those pieces together and, researchers like yourself that are digging into this. So I think that's very cool.
Yeah. I think it's cool too.
Hold on tight, guys. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but
to stay up to date on the show, check out Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin and Open Minds Media on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Discord, and the TikToks.
Now feel free to fast forward through these commercials so we can get back into the show. And now back to the show.
I found a ghostly encounter from the 1800s in my neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. And when I read it with my fresh eyes, and the research that I'm currently doing, it read a lot to me like an alien UFO story as opposed to a haunting, but it was written in the 1800s as a ghost story. It was this gentleman, his name was Abraham Cummings, and he was a scholar, college educated, and he might be considered one of the first paranormal investigators, at least on the East Coast in the United States. I'm not sure about the entire United States, but he was kind of traveling around collecting stories, and he was collecting these stories and investigating these stories for a book that he was writing. And he came up to Sullivan, Maine, and one of the first ever ghost stories in the United States is from a small town in Maine that's about 20 minutes from me, from the town of Sullivan, and it's the Nellie Butler haunting. And this guy came up to investigate the Nellie Butler haunting. And a lot of people were hearing her disembodied voice, and sometimes they would see like a ghostly image of a woman. Now, the Nellie Butler story is a huge story in its own right, and I'm not going to get into all of that, but the extraterrestrial potential part of it, Abraham Cummings was in town. He'd been in town for a few weeks, and so a lot of people knew who he was. He was talking to a lot of townsfolk. He's walking around town one night, and these 2 guys run up to him, and they said, "Hey, we were just coming into town and we went through the field and there's this weird thing in the field. You got to go check it out." And he actually thought the guys were messing with him. Mm-hmm. And he's like, "Come on, guys." And then, thought they were drunk maybe. And they're like, "No, we're telling you, you got to go check it out." So Abraham, he goes to the field and he's walking around and he's looking, he's not seeing anything. And then all of a sudden he sees it, and he described it as a big white glowing rock sitting in the field. A glowing white rock sounds to me a lot like a UFO. So he's observing it, and all of a sudden it starts to ascend. And he's like, "Holy crap, what am I looking at here?" Now it's hovering. While it's hovering, this entity comes out of it and comes to the ground and is now standing 5-6 feet away from Abraham. And he's looking at this thing and he's like, "You don't look like the woman these people are talking about." And all of a sudden it shapeshifted and grew to about 6 feet tall and seemed to him feminine. And it had some sort of weird crown that he described with light rays coming out of it. But this thing telepathically spoke to him, again, a telltale sign of, alien stuff, that, is this better? Does this look more like what you're talking about? And he's like, yeah. He doesn't really remember what else they exchanged for information. The next thing he knows, he's back in the boarding house that he's staying in. And he's like, "How'd I get in here?"
It's like missing time as well.
Exactly. So he runs back outside and, the glowing white rock is gone because he's nowhere near the field. The little entity thing is gone. And he's like, well, what just happened? And he actually kind of wrote this as an aside. It might have been 2 paragraphs in this long book of paranormal stories that he's been telling. It's just like 2 paragraphs. And he just chalked it up to like, man, that was a crazy ghost. And I was like, I don't know what that gentleman saw, but I've got to at least document it, from whatever perspective I'm reading it from at this point,
That's awesome.
That's one of those things that we talk about all the time on the show, that it's like, as the phenomenon has progressed, people have called it different things. Like, we uncover so much stuff that people account to the Fae, and it's line for line just extraterrestrial stuff, because I don't think people really had like a context to describe something as extraterrestrial until like the 1950s, maybe a little bit sooner than that, maybe like the 40s, but
early 40s.
Before that, it was the sky people. That was like the most you really got from these ancient cultures.
Sky people, airships, things like that.
But yeah, no, it's one of those things that it's just, I wonder how many times you could probably go back and find some of these old stories that fit into multiple categories. And off of that, it kind of makes you wonder. It's like we keep a division between these things, but the more that we've researched it, at least, it seems like there's not nearly as much of a division as people think there is. Like, a lot of this stuff might be coming from the same place, and it's just aspects of the same phenomenon.
Yeah, and all different aspects. We all come in different shapes and sizes and agendas, and have our own creations that we've made, and so who knows what it is, but it all could potentially be connected. And I think that's even more fascinating. Like, are we going to get to this one true thing, like whatever it is, and and if that happens, like, do we ascend? Like, what happens when we get there, or recognize that, or I don't know, but it's all fascinating and fun to think about.
Yeah, we talk about that concept on the show all the time, that like you don't need to dig very low below the surface on all this stuff before you start seeing the connections. And to me, the connections are almost what the most interesting part of the whole phenomena is.
Yeah.
And what I think is so interesting about that story you just told about the glowing rock in the field is, you hear this idea about the phenomenon wearing masks or presenting itself in different ways. And, this guy literally saw this thing change its mask right before his eyes. So, I mean, I think, again, like, the work you're doing is awesome for uncovering and bringing these kind of stories to light, because that's a really important account, not just in ufology, but like in the whole study of the paranormal that otherwise would be lost. So, I mean, that's an awesome story to hear. Thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely. And it was like my jaw dropped when I found it. Now, another thing that happened, I think it was just 2 years later, there was a woman named Cynthia Everett, and she was in a different town, probably, I think it's about 45 miles away from where this Abraham Cummings was. And she was a school teacher, and she had an interesting account, and she wasn't, looking at it through any other lens than just being a school teacher and an informed person. But it was late at night, not late at night, but it was evening. And she was like getting ready for bed, and she's sitting on her bed and looks out her window and sees what she described as a meteor flying in the sky. But she said it started doing all these zigzags and doing all these crazy things that meteors don't do. But this was a woman for like the first 20 years of her life, kept a running diary. And again, this was just another paragraph or two in this like 600-page diary. And it was one of the only strange things in this entire diary. And there was this other woman who was doing this woman's studies project and came across this diary and found that little nugget of a story and thought that was interesting enough to share offhandedly. And then I ended up finding that news article and tracking down the diary. It's a whole thing, and you get into a wormhole, but then you get this true nugget of a really fascinating story. Meteors don't zigzag across the sky, especially in 1808, so who knows what that was. But again, it read to me as something otherworldly.
For sure.
It should probably be documented,
And there's less phenomenon going on in the sky at that point regardless, because I've heard a bunch of like old stories about like when hot air balloons first started becoming a thing, that people would see them, they'd chalk them up to these like extraterrestrial type stories or like sky people stories. And I've heard a handful of those that I've kind of dissected, but especially when you start diving at stuff back then, it's like that's the only other viable option is that it was like a hot air balloon. They can't use the excuse of like, you know, it was a weather balloon, it was this, it was that. So people are seeing something in the sky and it's not a hot air balloon. It's like, how else do you explain that? Because there's no other things that could have been human manned at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, but you know, kind of going back to the masking thing or whatever was happening with Cummings, it's basically the same thing. I think that happened to me when I saw the lightning bolt. I didn't see a lightning bolt stuck in the sky. I'm pretty sure. I was describing, and you know, the thing of it is, I'm remembering it as the 5-year-old. You know, like I can't put. That's what it looks like to me, a lightning bolt stuck in the sky, which is still a strange image to, you know, think about in your head. But I think something was manipulating me, or however that stuff gets changed. And I wonder if something, or it sounds like something different like that happened to Abraham Cummings as well. And, you know, if that's happening in the 1800s and it's happening now, I'm sure it was happening to the Neanderthals, and I'm sure it's going to keep happening, you know, in the future. You know, like it's super interesting.
I mean,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it makes you wonder what the extent of them being able to manipulate the mind is, that if you see something that's not supposed to be there, they can just blanket an image over. It's the same thing with like when people see like owls and they're like, oh, extraterrestrial owl, like they do this like weird blend where it's like, it's almost like active camouflage. They just kind of like place an image here, and it makes you wonder if it's in your mind or if they're able to like put up some type of like facade where you're like seeing something, but you can't see them directly.
Yeah. And there seems to be examples of both, you know, so are different species along in different technologies, you know, or do they just have different technologies, or are we just, you know, we're dumb. We have human pea brains, you know what I mean? So who knows what the hell they're doing? We just don't understand it, you know?
Well, it's funny you bring all this up. I'm currently reading The Eighth Tower by John Keel. This is the first time I've read this one. I'm only about a third of the way through it, but he specifically talks about this idea of masking and the phenomenon presenting itself basically as the experiencer wants to see it. And, you know, if you have the frame of reference of religion, this thing's going to present itself as an angel or a demon. And, you know, at some point when, you know, Space Brothers, Little Green Men, that sort of thing became the prevailing idea, then, you know, that's what people expected to see of this phenomena. So, I mean, it's kind of just one of those weird synchronicities. I was reading that passage literally yesterday, and now we're talking about this tonight on the show. So just one of those weird things.
Yeah, that's really great. And, you know, it's also very personalized, because even though it's 2025, which still seems insane to me, but even though it's 2025, there are very religious people that I would assume still see it that way as angels or demons. I mean, there's I don't like mentioning him very often, but John Venture of MUFON, I'm not sure if he's still with MUFON, but it turns out he's a bit of a bigot and, you know, not good for the field. But he's under this belief that aliens and UFOs and all that stuff are demons and bad, and, you know, based on your current beliefs, despite what we know and technology and what's happening around us, we can still, I mean, you can put yourself in whatever tunnel or narrow-minded thing you want to be in and still see things as they are not, which is, I think, scary, you know.
Well, the idea that, you know, aliens, extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them, are like literal hell demons is something we've also talked about a lot on the show. We did a whole series about like Jack Parsons and the Collins Elite. Yeah. And, you know, this whole idea of this clandestine government group that was under the, not assumption, but like truly believed that all this was because of demonic entities. And, you know, we brought up the fact that, you know, this happened in whatever the 40s, 50s. So these were all, you know, old guys that were probably a lot of them born in like the 1800s. That would have been their frame of reference, was angels and demons and just strictly spiritual, religious, biblical whatever you want to call it, ideology. So, this is a great conversation. It's funny how many things that have come up that we just like beat like a drum on this show.
And just because I don't agree with Venture, especially with his personal politics, it would seem, because of what he posts publicly, for me to scrutinize. But even though I don't agree with that stuff, it doesn't mean that he is wrong in regards to what he thinks aliens are. We can all have our own opinions on what aliens are. I can't say I'm a 100% believer that they are extraterrestrial, that they're, space aliens outside of our galaxy. I can't say that. I don't know if they're ultra terrestrial. I don't know what they are. I think maybe what irks me a little bit with people like John Venture and some other people is when they say they know what they are, and there's just no way that that.
Yeah, if you hear anybody that says they have the definite answers in this field, to completely run back the other direction.
you stop listening. Yeah.
But I mean, going back into what you're mentioning, just kind of like the descriptive context of stuff too. I mean, something to kind of take into consideration, like when somebody's in contact with something like Bledsoe, for example, that seem to be these like light beings, if people already have that biblical connotation of things, of course you're going to see a light being and associate it with an angel. And then on the flip side, if you see like a reptilian looking being or like a gray or like a mantis or like these creature looking beings, like the first thing you're going to go to is like, oh, it's a demon, it's a creature. So, I mean, it kind of makes you wonder, the chicken or the egg concept, like what came first, that religion came first and then people are fitting this into the gap, or was it that these things came first and just because of their physical descriptions, people fit them into the gap of religion and kind of created their own thing off of that, and strictly a viewpoint? Because I mean, I've talked about the Bible many times on the show and how many things there are that line up with things that have happened with all these ancient cultures and things. But again, it could be just simply from one perspective, because, if you're looking at everything from the ground, you're only going to have that ground perspective. But if you're looking at the sky, you're going to have a totally different perspective on all these different events that are happening, not to mention just the progression of the language to be able to describe what you're seeing at the time.
Yeah.
So then it just turns into this, like, what came first? Like, are they aliens? Are they angels and demons? Like, which one is it? Like, because clearly we're talking about the same thing, just with two different names.
Yeah. Agree. And, we see that all too often where there are many different schools of thought. There's Dolores Cannon. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but in all of her teachings and her hypnotic regressions that she initiated. And there's another Dr. Newton, Cannon and Newton were doing very similar things and had different names for the same stuff. So if you're reading both books, they're saying the same things. And it's really interesting where Dolores kind of, in some of her work anyways, will go towards extraterrestrial, where Newton goes towards more spiritual, but it's just crazy how everything is described as being the same. There's just a different word here or there, when describing a certain entity or a certain feeling or a certain sight or something. It's just fascinating to, I think the best thing I can do is kind of zoom out and be a third party observer to all of that, so I can try to tell these stories that I collect in as unbiased a way as possible, even though I have my own personal beliefs. I mean, especially with what I just said about John and everything, that doesn't mean that's how my writing comes across or how I present information publicly. I want people to read these things. I think it's a great source for historical documentation of just strange stories. It's an honor to be a part of that. And B, I want people to make up their own minds, and somebody reading it who has a different belief than they might be like, wow, this book is filled with demons. This is crazy, or this book is filled with this or that. And that's okay. I want people to come up with their own conclusions, because it's about processing and thinking through what these stories are and what could they mean and what could they imply. And I think that's very personal to each of us. Nobody's going to fit in a box. These stories certainly don't fit in a box. We can't expect it to be cookie cutter for people to be cookie cutter who are reading it,
All right, y'all, we got to take a break and pay some bills.
But if you guys hate ads, well, you guys can get ad-free and early access on Patreon for just $1 a month. And it's a great way to support the show. And if you'd like to get some extra video content and merch store discounts, there are a few other tiers with additional benefits with 7-day free trials available for most.
And now back to the show.
Yeah, it's one of those things too that it's like, even on the show, we try not to like give definite answers to things. Like, we'll throw suggestions, we'll throw theories that seem like they're probable to us. We'll explain how we got to those conclusions. But at the end of the day, when it comes to all this weird phenomenon, it's all about like what you want to view as like your context on things. Because unless we get to a point in the future where we can go back on these events and we can re-look at them again, I mean, essentially we're going through word of mouth and telephone. So it's like, you know, we're going to have fun theorizing what happened. But unless we can go back to that point, we're never going to know for sure, unfortunately, or unless an event happens in the future that explains the past. But I mean, a lot of this stuff, it seems like it's a lot of one-off sightings, a lot of weird random stuff. Like there's all these connecting pieces, but for the most part, it's kind of hard to know which direction to go with it. And I mean, even talking about the physical descriptions, kind of like we were talking about earlier, and the phenomenon like changing itself, like, you know, we don't know where these things are coming from. Like you mentioned, they could be extraterrestrial, they could be coming from another dimension. But if they're coming from another dimension, it doesn't mean that their laws of physics apply the same as ours. Just like that story you mentioned earlier with this thing changing its shape, like all these phenomenons that we're talking about, you know, they may not all be as physical as we think they are. Even like, you know, talking about these like light beings versus like grays. One seems like it's way more physical than the other, but it doesn't mean that these things aren't existing in another place where they might not be malleable. And I mean, even going into the other idea about the description of like seeing other dimensions that they use from like a ball, saying that like if you're underwater, you only see a circle, but when you get up out of the water, then you see that it's a full sphere. You know, a lot of these things that we're seeing, you know, we may not be seeing them in their full context, because even going into like some biblical descriptions, you know, they talk about the angels being all these like rotating wheels with eyes and all this type of stuff. And that sounds like an interdimensional being to me, because it doesn't make sense with our laws of physics. So of course they'd be able to manipulate themselves in a lower dimension, because, you know, assumably if we had the ability to do that one day, we'd probably be able to manipulate the dimension below us too.
Sure. Yeah. It would make sense. You know, there's a story about a doctor from New York, Tony Sikoria, I think is his name. And in 1994 or 5, something like that, he was struck by lightning, and he didn't even understand what was happening. He was making a phone call on a payphone, and all of a sudden there was like this bright flash, and he's like, what the hell was that? That was crazy. And then he sees his mother-in-law coming down these stairs that was like on the side of this building where the payphone was, and she's screaming and running at him. And he's like, what the hell's her? You know, what's going on with her? And as she gets down to the bottom of the stairs, she doesn't stop and talk to him. She turns and kneels down in front of him. And so he looks down and sees this body. And he's like, whoa, okay. So I just figured out a whole bunch of stuff. You know, he's thinking at that point, I'm probably dead, but I think I'm energy. And my brain didn't miss a beat. Like, I'm still me. I'm still thinking this stuff. And he's having these revelations while he's standing there watching his mother-in-law, you know, kneel over his maybe dead body. So some other people start to gather, and he's feeling this pull. He wants to like go see his wife and stuff, and she happens to be up these stairs. So he starts walking up the stairs, and he looks down and notices that his legs are disappearing. And by the time he gets to the top of the stairs, he's just energy. His body's gone, and he knows he needs to go into the hallway and into the room, but he's like, well, I'm energy. So he just goes through the wall. So now he's in the room where his wife is, and his wife is in there, and she's like painting kids' faces and stuff. They were at like this event thing that was happening. And so he's watching her paint these kids' faces, and he takes note of like who's in the room. And then he starts feeling this pull, and he starts going out through the roof, and now he's rising into the air. And then the next thing he knows, he's a light being, and he's floating in an energy river. And he thinks it's amazing, and it feels so good. And even though he has 3 kids and his wife, and he loves them dearly, like so much, he just really loves where he is and how he's feeling in that moment. And he's describing it as being, you know, a light being and being in an energy river. And the next thing he knows, he feels an immense amount of pain, and he opens his eyes and he's back in his body, and he's like, no. In his head, he's screaming because he doesn't want to be back there. He wants to go back to the energy river, and it felt so good. And and he's having CPR performed on him, and then his eyes finally open and he sees everybody, and they call an ambulance, and he doesn't want the ambulance. He's a surgeon, and he knows he's in pain, but he knows he's okay. But he promises to call some of his colleagues, and he does, like, almost immediately, and he goes see them the following week. And they said, despite the entry and exit wound of the lightning, like, you're okay. His heart was fine, but he did develop this ability to learn things really quickly. And he lost interest in, even though he was a medical doctor, he was also really into writing for medical journals and doing a lot of research and above and beyond medical stuff. And that started to lose interest for him. And he started having these dreams about this song that was in his head. And he was a piano player in his dreams. He's never played the piano ever in his life, but he was having these crazy dreams about the songs, these piano songs in his head. And then he's humming them all day, and he's got to get them out. So he buys this program that helps you write music. It's basically writing music for dummies. And I think it's called Syllabus, something like that. I have it written down somewhere, but he gets this program, and he finally gets this song out, and he figures out how to play it. And since 1996, he's been around the world playing this music. And it turns out he's still a practicing medical doctor, and he practices, even though he's from New York, he moved to Maine in 2019, and he practices 30 miles away at the St. Joseph Hospital in Bangor, Maine. And I came across his story, and I was like, what? And even on the hospital's website, they talk about him being struck by lightning and how he's told his story, all around the world, and has played his music all around the world. But he described himself in a very non-biblical way of being a light being, and it really fascinating, Shayn, when you were talking about light beings, and there's biblical references that go along with that. And him, I guess, not coming from a biblical standpoint, was still describing something very similar. It's interesting.
So Shayn, I think I've told this story on the show before, but it's been a few years ago now. I just randomly ended up, like 3 bar stools down from this guy at a bar, and he was an older gentleman. So not like the story you just told. He was very just, salt of the earth type guy. I think he said he was a house painter. But anyway, he told me this story about a near-death experience he had. And what's so striking to me is the language is exactly the same. This, learned doctor described this experience in the exact same terms that this house painter did, down to, I met these beings of light. I had this sense of euphoria. They told me I had to go back, but I didn't want to. I wanted to stay where I was. And, every day since there, I've just wanted to go back. And, this guy was in tears by the time he was done telling me this story. So, to try to make that as condensed as I can, it's just striking to me that 2 people from vastly different walks of life can describe basically the same experience in the exact same words verbatim. That just leads me to believe there's something larger that's going on, and something that's manipulating and, almost beaming these ideas and these thoughts into these people's minds.
Yeah. And, NDEs are nothing new. That's been going on. And a lot of them have just been described in very similar manners, and sometimes it does take, third-party people reading these stories or hearing about them to be like, oh, that's very similar to that. It's just a little bit different words, but because somebody in the, talking about, in the 1800s with an NDE is going to sound a little different than nowadays. But I mean, you can piece that together and it's the same story. So I don't know. There is something bigger, and I don't know what it is, and I don't claim to know what it is, but, it makes me, I'm getting older, and I do think about death, and I do have like my own personal issues where, with anxiety and depression, also comes suicidal ideation. And it's something that I think about from time to time. Just be easier to not be here sometimes. And even though that's not my end goal and that's not something I want to do, at least when death comes, I feel a little bit more comforted from all the research I've done within the paranormal that maybe it doesn't end here, you know, and that's comforting.
Mm-hmm. Just that feeling that you have this like feeling that's so comfortable that you don't want to come back from it. I mean, that kind of brings in the whole idea with like when you get into like reincarnation and everything, that you have to have your mind wiped because otherwise you just want to go back to where you are. I mean, that kind of brings in like a whole different validity to all that, where again, it doesn't make you like scared of death necessarily anymore because you just hear about this euphoric, fantastic like feeling. Because I feel like as crazy as it would sound, like I would either rather have absolute nothingness or I would rather have something like that. Like those are my two hopes for that. Like, I don't want there to be some place where you get tortured forever. Hopefully I wouldn't go there regardless, but it brings a little bit more into it where it's a little bit more comfortable, which honestly, I feel like is a main reason why a lot of people start diving into like the paranormal, for example, is because, you know, most of the people I've talked to on the show, a really good portion of them, it's either one, they've had an experience and that's why they get into it, or two, it's because they've had a loved one that's passed away and they were trying to find a way to connect with them, to communicate with them. So, I mean, that's kind of the entry level into here, is almost to like try to find peace with death and find comfort in it, which honestly I think is why like the spiritualism movement was so big during the 1800s and why all this paranormal stuff really kicked up around then. It was just people were trying to find, you know, living in the world that they lived in then and even now, just some kind of comfort in knowing that there is someplace better to go.
Yeah.
Hold on tight, guys. We'll be back with that bizarre stuff you crave. But
if you would like to rock some gear for your favorite podcast or creature, hop on over to the OMM merch store for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly.
And we are back with the high strangeness. Let's get back into it.
You guys are familiar with Stephen King, but are you familiar with one of his books? It's called Revival.
I don't think I've read that one. No.
Yeah, I don't think I have either.
It's an interesting one, and it was some people call it almost getting back true to form after he had his major accident where somebody hit him while he was walking on the road. But it's this story about this this kid, and it actually goes throughout his whole life from childhood to over middle age, probably in his 60s or something. And it's about this preacher that he comes to know in this small town in Maine. And as he grows up, he keeps kind of running into this preacher in different eras of his life. And he's now more in his twilight years, this person, and he runs into the preacher again. And the preacher has had this fascination with electricity his whole life. Like, there are little facets that he would teach in Bible class about electricity. There was this thing he would do where he had this little metal Jesus that he made, and he could make it walk on water on this little diagram thing that he made for the kids. And this was, back in the 50s. But now in modern times and technology being what it is, this guy came to understand why the preacher was so fascinated with electricity. And it was because he wanted somebody to die or to kill somebody, have them experience what happens after you die. And then with electricity, bring them back, like Frankenstein, or like, reviving somebody with, that's had a heart attack, but he's kind of doing it to the nth degree. So it doesn't matter how you die. When he puts this electrical contraption on this person, they come back to life from this jolt. And hopefully they'll be alive long enough to tell them what it was like on the other side. And it turns out his contraption worked. And so he killed this woman and then brought this woman back to life. And just by touching the woman, he got to see what she saw. And then the preacher grabbed on to the guy, and he got to see what the preacher and the woman were seeing. And it turns out the afterlife were these massive humanoid ant beings that had enslaved souls. And so once you passed over, you were enslaved for the rest of your existence by these giant ant creatures, Stephen King style, but I just find it wholly fascinating that we're just all so obsessed one way or another with what happens after this. And is it scary? Is it nothing? I have a very close friend of mine who one of his worst fears is that after he dies, his consciousness wakes up in the casket. And that's just where he is for all eternity. And I'm like, my God, that's terrifying. That would be the worst outcome. The ant things, even though that would be awful, I don't know, at least you can see their world, because it's a different dimension type of thing. But
now you've just given us all a new existential fear now. But no, I'm not familiar with that Stephen King book, but what a great title, Revival. It has kind of a double meaning, you're reviving the dead, and then with the preacher, there's the whole revival aspect there. So kind of off topic, but other than Kevin, we don't talk to many resident Mainers. I read a Stephen King book every October. I call it Stephen King-tober. What's your favorite Stephen King book?
Oh God. That's a great question. I think it changes from time to time. I was obsessed with Salem's Lot last year. The new movie came out and they had a song in it. Oh God, Gordon Lightfoot, Sundown is the song that they used for the Salem's Lot. And there's this amazing line. This is like the only reason they use this song. It's sundown, you better beware if you come down creeping by my back stairs, something like that. But it's talking about something creeping around his back stairs after the sun goes down. That's not what the song is about. It's about him and a girl, and like what every song from the 70s is about. But there's this really cool creepy part of it, and they just latched onto it and they used it for the new Salem's Lot movie. And for some reason that really spoke to me. I love it when something different can be applied to something else, and then it's freaky, it's creepy. I really enjoy that. And Jordan Peele does that really well with some songs that he uses. Anyway, so Salem's Lot I was obsessed with last year. So that watched the new movie, watched the old movie, reread the book, and there's also a sequel in Night Shift. It's just a short story sequel, and it's equally as frightening and fascinating as the original. There's also a prequel, but it's awful in my opinion. But so Salem's Lot I was obsessed with last year, but I think my favorite thing I've read in the last 5 years is The Long Walk. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
That's one of the early ones, is it not?
It is. It's a Bachman one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and apparently it's going to be a movie coming out this year.
Okay. Well, I might have to do that for Stephen King-tober this year.
But The Long Walk is great, man. It again, it takes place in Maine, and it's literally about a long walk. It's almost like a cross between like Lord of the Flies and The Purge, kind of. I don't know. It's really strange, but when you get to adolescence as a boy, I think it's boys only, there's this thing called the Long Walk, and it's a lottery, and you don't have to sign up for it. But for some reason, it's become a thing. They don't tell you why, but it's become a thing. And you start at the tip of Maine, and it's 100 boys, and you just walk as long as you can for days. There's no sleeping. You have a belt full of food and water, and there's military that follow the boys as they walk, and they're given more food and water as they run out, and you just have to walk and walk and walk. So they walk for days, and the farthest I think they ever got was like Boston or something. And so this story is one particular long walk where there's kid from Maine, because it's kids from all over that do it, from all over the United States, and it's become this cultural event where people from all over will line up kind of like parades to see the boys walking through. But if you walk slower than 4 miles an hour, you get shot and killed. And
it starts getting dark there.
If you stop walking for a second, you get shot and killed. I think you're given some warnings, but after 3 warnings, you get killed. And it's a fascinating story, and you can imagine what these kids go through on this long walk through Maine, and really fascinating. And so I think that was my favorite thing that I've read recently. in the last 5 years.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that one out for sure.
Yeah.
But let's see, what do we want to hop into now? So, actually, speaking of Maine, this is probably a perfect opportunity to do it. Talking about some weird stories coming from Maine. I know that you've collected a lot. I don't know which one you want to share today, but let's dive into some of the weird stories from Maine, man.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier about all of these things being connected. And one thing that makes me feel like some of these stories are all connected is how they kind of start sometimes, or how they're noticed the first time. And I have found this common thread in a lot, not all, but in a lot of Dogman encounters where people are seeing balls of light first. And then they're experiencing a Dogman. So in one story from Maine, these people had moved into this house, and while they were unpacking one night, the gentleman just happened to glance out the window towards his backyard, which there's, a backyard and then a wood line. And he was seeing these balls of light kind of bouncing around throughout the trees. And he's like, what the hell is that? And it actually concerned him because he thought it might have been poachers and people walking with flashlights or something, So he asked his adult son and his daughter's boyfriend if they would go check it out. And they do, and they don't see anything. They don't see, if there's like a path that people have carved out by walking back there all the time. They really don't find anything out of the ordinary. But it all kind of culminates one night when they're sitting out on their porch and they start seeing some eye shine. And this eye shine, while it's on the ground and it appears to be drinking from this man-made pond that's also on their property, they make a noise. The eye shine notices them, and then it stands up. They thought it might have been a deer drinking, but this thing stood up, and all of a sudden it's 7 feet tall. It's bipedal. And then two more stand up beside it. And so they're like, what the hell are those things? And they have this high-powered flashlight, and they shine it, and they see these, bipedal human-like things that have dog faces, these straight-up ears and the snout and the short brown fur, and they appear to be quite muscular. And so the light seems to scare them. So they scatter. And now they're out of sight. And so that's even more concerning. So they run inside because they're terrified. They're like, what the hell did we just see? They immediately call the cops. The cops sound like they've heard this story before. And they're like, we're not going to come out. Just stay inside and keep your door locked. Like, what? Like, call the game wardens. Okay. So they call the game wardens. They too almost sound like they've heard this story before, but they at least tell them, like, listen, don't try to go near them. Just stay inside, but we're not coming out. Okay. That was no help. So he keeps his guns out in a shed that's outside, and he really wants to at least go get a gun, but his wife is like pleading him not to, but he's got to go do it. So he goes outside, and there's nothing, thankfully, but it's pitch black, and the shed isn't too far, but he's disabled. It takes him a little while to walk. So, he's nervous, but he starts going down the stairs, and all of a sudden there's this bright light that's on him. And he's like, whoa, and he realizes it was a motion light that's on top of the shed. And he's like, okay, I think those things don't like light. So as long as I can keep that light on, I'm golden. Well, the light immediately shuts off because he stopped moving. So he's moving around again, trying to get the light to come back on. It's not coming back on. And he can hear something coming closer. So he's like, I'm not doing this. He starts to back up. As he backs up, the light comes on again. He's like, okay, cool. But he sees that these creatures are just on the edge of this light, and they were coming towards him. So he's like, there's no way I'm going to make it to the shed and get guns. So he goes back inside. He goes upstairs. He's with his wife. His adult daughter's asleep upstairs. So they wake her up and try to tell her what's going on. And she looks out the window. And they look out the window, and staring back up at them are 5 creatures. And then they see that there's maybe this smaller creature, or maybe two of them are like having sex or something. But I think what they figured out is that there was a juvenile on the back of one of them that was also looking up, so it was smaller, but now there's 6 set of eyes that they noticed. So for the rest of the night, what they hear are these things like terrorizing them. They're clawing on the side of the house. They're banging on the side of the house. They can hear them on the roof walking, but they can't tell if they don't understand how doors work, or that you can just break a window easily and come in, or if they are just truly frightening these people because it's fun to them. They don't know, because they're not trying to get inside. They're just like making a lot of noise to scare them, it seems like. So this goes on till, 3-4 o'clock in the morning. They can't stay up anymore, and they just fall asleep where they are, which is in their daughter's room by that window where they saw all of them looking up at them. They finally wake up the next morning, and again, only just a couple of hours have gone by. It's like 6 a.m. It's light, and they're not hearing anything. They look out the window. They're not seeing anything. So they go outside, and they claim that there's claw marks and all these things everywhere. There's footprints everywhere, and they end up moving out about a month later from this place. But that's just one story, and it started out with these balls of light seen in the forest.
So just a couple notes that I jotted down while you were telling that story. First off, it sounds very reminiscent to the whole Hopkinsville Goblins situation.
Right. I'm glad you said it, because I was waiting to say that too.
Secondly, you hear a lot of stories about juvenile Sasquatch. I think that's the first one about a juvenile Dogman I've ever heard. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, me too, I think.
And just kind of, a strange kind of oddball observation probably, but it seems like there's something with like man-made lakes and man-made bodies of water, and maybe, the disruption of the earth when these things are built, because it seems like in just, people we've talked to, that's a recurring motif, especially in Dogman cases, but in just the paranormal in general, this idea of like man-made bodies of water. Weirdness seems to follow not far behind.
Land Between the Lakes, prime example. This is another one with Dogman specifically.
Wow. That's really interesting.
But I've never heard that story before, though. That's one of those ones that like keeps you on the edge of your seat. Like, I'm surprised that one hasn't had more like publicity behind it, or people are covering it on shows or something, especially considering how big Dogman's getting.
Yeah, it has had some publicity. I did tell a condensed version of it. I didn't want to go on and on, but it was featured on Paranormal Witness, an old sci-fi channel show. And I think you can find it on YouTube. It's called Wolfpack on Paranormal Witness. In one of my books, it's got the season and the episode number too. But
I've got to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Another strange synchronicity. You can see it here on my koozie. My college's mascot is the Wolfpack, and it's like a Dogman, like bipedal Dogman type thing. So
that's crazy,
man. The hits just keep on coming tonight.
That's crazy, man. And Linda Godfrey, I'm sure you guys are familiar with her. The godmother of Dogman. She interviewed this couple originally, and their story was included in one of her books. So, there's been some coverage of it, but yeah, it's a fascinating story. And a lot of people of Palmyra, where this happened, and the towns that border it, a lot of people know this story, and they're like, yeah, there's weird stuff in the woods, guys. Like, be careful.
Have you found any other reportings of anything in that area? Any other weird sightings, or even anything similar to that in that area?
Yeah. There's, I think that story happened in like 2004. And in 2018, there was a group of friends who went camping in the woods in Palmyra. I'm not sure how close they were to this farmhouse where the other Dogmen were sighted, but they went camping in the woods in Palmyra, and everything was fine when they arrived. It wasn't until the middle of the night, once they went to bed, that they started like hearing stuff out in the woods. And they were hearing a lot of like heavy, like stomping around. And I think they were thinking like Sasquatch, for a little while. But then they started hearing like these blood curdling screams. And a couple of them got out of their tents to listen, and it was just too creepy that they actually, all of them, hightailed it out of there. And when they came back the next day, they claimed that all of their gear and stuff was not just strewn about, but was like ripped to shreds, which is pretty interesting. And I think one of those people knew about the Dogman Palmyra story, and that was their assumption that it was Dogman.
I mean, that first one was 2004, you said? Did it end up coming out that same year, or was it one of those ones that kind of popped up when Dogman was starting to get dived into? Because there's a lot of stuff that I feel like got kind of categorized wrong, so I'm kind of curious if this was one of those ones that kind of stayed off in obscurity until like Dogman started kind of becoming a thing.
Yeah,
people were paying attention to it.
I'm pretty sure that's the case. I forget when Godfrey's book came out, but it was definitely a few years after that encounter where it was included in her book. And I think Paranormal Witness, that came out much, much later than even Linda Godfrey's book. And I think they got the story from Linda Godfrey.
Do you guys know offhand when the Beast of Bray Road, because I know she was the first one that started writing about that. Do you know when like that stuff was getting written about?
I feel like Bray Road was like the 70s or 80s.
So the Dogman stuff for her does go back a bit earlier then.
Yeah.
See, she writes all these, like the Weird Michigan, Weird whatever, all those state books too. So I'm kind of curious how many more of these like weird little stories might be hidden within that, that people haven't actually like dived back into yet.
All right, guys, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And now we're getting back to the bizarre.
I know that you had another really, really weird one that you dived into that I think the listeners from this show will probably really enjoy. I don't want to give up too much away, but that guy that found that perfect fishing lake.
Yes. Silas Remick was the gentleman's name. Just a quick side note. Apparently, allegedly, sightings go back to 1936 for the Beast of Bray Road. That's crazy.
1936.
I was just looking it up as well. Yeah, it said 36 earliest sightings, but kind of the big, wave of sightings was the 80s. It looks like from what I could tell.
See, I think the Michigan Dogman stuff might go back a little bit further then, because I think it was like the 1887 actually would have been the Wexford County Michigan Dogman, like the first one that's categorized as like the first Dogman sightings.
We are experiencing technical issues. There is no cause for alarm. Please be at ease.
Yeah, so the case of Silas Remick, he was a gentleman that was written about in the early 1900s, and he was in a rural part of Maine. And growing up with his dad, they loved to go fishing, and his dad, and really anybody that Silas talked to, told him to stay away from Devil's Lake. It was this lake that nobody in town would ever go to. And it's not like it was right next to town. You had to travel a little ways to get to it. So it was even inconvenient to go to. So it was easier to fish right around town. But as Silas grew up, his father passed away, and he became head of the homestead, living with his siblings and his mother. And he was about 25 at this point. And he was really in charge of just so much. And he liked going on his little fishing vacations, if you will, when he could sneak away. And since his father passed, even though he missed him, he really wanted to know why you couldn't go to Devil's Lake. So he snuck up there. And the first time he goes fishing there, he comes back with a whole bunch of fish. And he's like, man, that was some great fishing. And his mother is super pleased because they have a ton of meat. And a few days later, he's like, I think I'll go back. So he does. And he catches a whole bunch of fish again. And his mother's really happy. But he's thinking about this lake too much. He's almost becoming obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. So he goes immediately the next day, and then the next day. Now he's going every day, and it's been a couple of weeks, to the point where he's shirking some of his responsibilities at the homestead. And his mother starts to notice and talks to him about it. And he's like, you know what? You're right. I can't keep going to this lake every day, and I'll do better, basically. But he doesn't. And he goes back to the lake the next day. The problem, though, is that he didn't come home that time. So his mother, very worried, she goes to the next homestead that's a few miles away and then goes to the one beyond that so they can create a search party to find her son. And she explains to them how he's been going up to Devil's Lake, and they're like, oh no, not Devil's Lake. But they go and search, and he's nowhere to be found, and he's never found. So about 5 years later, this rich New Yorker moves close to the area, buys a camp, and he hires a local to take him out onto the water to help him fix up his homestead. And these guys become pretty fast friends. And the New York guy is really into the paranormal and all things kind of strange. So he's asking the local guy, or is always asking the local guy, like, come on, you got to have something. And he's like, there's this one story about this guy, Silas Remick, and he went missing and he was never heard from again. And that's kind of strange, but I don't think it's paranormal. I think the kid just drowned or something. And, well, why'd you bring it up then? And he's like, well, it was weird. He died or disappeared from Devil's Lake. Well, what's Devil's Lake? And the local tells him, well, it's this body of water that we don't go to because strange things happen up there. And what sort of strange things? And he doesn't know because he's never been. So he goes, if you're not scared of the paranormal, because they kind of would argue about the paranormal, the New Yorker being a believer, the local not so much. He's like, if you're not afraid of the paranormal, let's go up to Devil's Lake tomorrow. Maybe we'll find Silas. And the local was like, well, I'm not scared. Of course, let's go. So they go the next day and they get up to this area and it's gorgeous. There's like a mountainous area very close by. And there's this really it looks like this large cave that has some water going into it. And they're like, wow, it's just really pristine, really beautiful. And they're just canoeing along. And all of a sudden there's this splash of water almost in front of them. And they're like, what the hell was that? And they look at the surface of the water and they see this thing bobbing in the water. So they get closer and one of them grabs it and it turns out it's some sort of jar or bottle or something. And they open it and there's a piece of paper in it. So they take the paper out. They actually canoe back to land because the paper had gotten wet. So they canoed back to land just on the banks of where the Devil's Lake is. And they lay out this piece of paper on a rock to try to dry it off. And they can actually read it pretty well. So they start reading it. And it turns out it's a letter from Silas Remick. And it explains what happened to him. So he said he had been going up to the lake and the fishing had been great, but he developed this weird obsession with it. And the more times he went, he started seeing strange figures up at the lake, but they were really far away. They were by this cave thing and they looked like, men from far away, and he would look at them and they looked at him and it seemed they had an understanding. You stay there, I'll stay here. We won't bother each other. And that was fine for a while. Sometimes they'd get a little bit closer and he was like, maybe I'm getting too close and they're warning me. So he'd back off a little bit. And then one day when he was coming home, these two figures popped up in the middle of his path while he was going home. And he realized they weren't men at all. They were bipedal. They had arms and legs, but their skin was weird. And they had the face of frogs, some sort of lizard person. And the next thing he knows, they're apprehending him. They're grabbing him by the arms. And he's like, what the hell? And then he passes out. He wakes up. He doesn't know how much longer later. And he feels really weird. His breathing is labored. And he feels like he's, floating. And he realizes he's underwater. And he's in like this makeshift jail cell or box or something. And somehow he can breathe. He doesn't understand how he can inhale water and breathe it out, but he's breathing fine. It's just a little hard for him to breathe. He's not used to it, but he's breathing. And he looks out the windows of what this thing that he's in, and he can see all these other frog people swimming around and talking and interacting and kind of like living their lives. It's like a little town down there. And then sometimes they would come and get him and they would bring him places, but he would pass out when this would happen, or they put him asleep. He wasn't sure what was happening. But sometimes before he would pass out, he could see really bright light above him. And he began to assume that he was getting close to the surface of the water when he would see the light. So he devised this plan where he would write a note so at least his mother would know what happened to him. So he went into his pocket and he had a jar of pickles that he had brought with him the last time he'd gone fishing. He emptied out the jar, and I think he used like the back of the label to write the note, or he found paper somewhere, and he had a little stubby pencil, and he realized he could write underwater on it. So he wrote this letter, everything that I just told you, and please tell my mother that I didn't leave. I didn't get killed. I'm apparently a part of the frog people now. And when this jar splashed up to the surface, they're thinking that's when Silas was being actively transferred under them by the frog people. And he let the jar go and it popped up. And that's the letter that they found, but that's the story of the frog people from Maine. And I'm such a fan of the Loveland Frogman. And I have a new book coming out in just a couple of months, and it's about humanoid encounters. And I was digging everywhere for some sort of lizard or frogman story from Maine. And I had to dig, but I found a story from a guy named George Cleveland. He wrote this book, Maine, of verse and story. So there's poems and stories in this book. And one of the stories was the Silas Remick case is the name of the story. And it was about these frog people. Crazy.
Wow, that's a good one. I've never heard that story, but we also covered the Loveland Frog not so long ago on the show.
That's why I figured we'd have to hit it before we started wrapping everything up. It's just because we recently covered the Loveland Frogs, and it brings in a whole other thing from it, because I honestly haven't heard any other Frogman stories besides this one now and the original Loveland Frogs from Ohio.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. There's been other like amphibious stories, but not specifically, frogman. I was on a different podcast and I had shared that, Shayn, it might have been your podcast. And I shared the story. I'm like, hey, I had a great talk with Shayn. We talked about UFOs and the Frog People of Maine and blah, 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 whatever the hell else, and shared the link. And Lauren Coleman, the godfather of cryptozoology, messages me and he's like, what the hell are the Frog People of Maine? And this was like, it's such a delight for me, because like Orin, I know you don't know me at all, but Lauren lives in my state and we actually live just a couple of towns over. So we know each other quite well. And we get along and we talk and all that stuff. So it was really cool that he messaged me though.
No,
and was
that's
like,
awesome.
Here's something I haven't heard of. What the hell is this? And so I told him where I got the story and what they were. And he's like, oh, cool. Okay. Thank you.
Well, hey, when you're impressing the Godfather, you're doing pretty good, I guess.
You got something good and good gold if he hasn't actually discovered it yet. So
yeah.
Hold on tight, guys. This is our last ad break. But if you've got some free time, don't forget to check out the awesome friends of the show, I Know Squatch, Snarly Yow Natural Products, Crypto Teology, and Big Ape Threads.
And our other friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available down in the show notes. And we are back, so let's hop right in.
So, Nomar, kind of on that note, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you tonight. But would you tell us and our listeners a little bit about your writing and where they can find your books and reach out to you and get in contact with you, whatever you be comfortable with sharing?
Yeah, so I'm basically at Nomar Slevik on social media, but that's pretty limited to Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. But hit me up if you have a story. I'd love to hear it, especially from Maine. I'd love to hear it. It's kind of my specialty, collecting strange stories from Maine. I have a new book coming out in just a couple months called Humanoid Encounters, and it's all manner of strange creatures sighted by Mainers in Maine. And I'm very excited about that. It's got over 100 stories, some never before published, which I'm always excited about. And that is currently it's in a pre-order state right now, and you can go to gofundme.com and just search for Humanoid Encounters, and it'll be one of the first ones that come up because there's not a lot on GoFundMe. And you can pre-order the book for $30. That means that's the manufacturing of the book. You get a bookmark, and I sign the book for you, and it ensures that you get a copy. I do GoFundMe because I like to have a collection of these books so I can take them around with me to various appearances throughout the year. So GoFundMe helps me initially to get a big portion of these books. People can get a copy, but I also have a backlog of them that I can take around with me. But other than that, it will be available on my website and on Amazon, also Kindle, Apple Books, all that good stuff. You just type my name, Nomar Slevik, into Google, and you're going to find everything you need to find.
And we can, of course, include that GoFundMe link if you want to. If you don't mind, send it to me down in the show description so everybody can find that one quick and easy. And I'll make sure I include all the other links in the show description too, of course.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, Nomar, thank you so much for coming on. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you, a pleasure to meet you at last. And we'll have to have you come on again at some point. It's just been awesome getting to pick your brain and hear some of your stories. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Same. You guys are gems, super easy to talk to. So anytime, I'm down.
All right. And on that note, Shayn, if any of our listeners want to get up with us, why don't you tell them how they can do that?
Number one, you guys can email us through bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of us on social media. Instagram and Facebook, of course, are the ones that we are the most active on. Or you guys can get a hold of us through the submission form, which, of course, is available on the link tree, which is available down in that show description. And the last way you guys can get a hold of us is through our hotline. That number is 313-364-1551. Text, call, whatever happens to be easier for you guys. Totally cool with us. Just don't forget to get a hold of us.
And again, all of this shit is mentioned in the link tree in the show description.
And just like a lot of today's stories, especially the one right there on the tail end, which seems to be somewhat of an exclusive on this show for the time being until Nomar ends up going to conventions and spreading it around, we keep it bizarre. That story's bizarre. We always will stay bizarre. So guys, at the end of the day, you guys too, always remember to stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
There's frogmans in the lake.